Hollywood has been determined to change the history of America and tell you a new story that's less about the glory of great things happening and more about all of the despair, the terrible, the awful, and dare I say the negative to tear down the US of A. Today we'll tell you with Eric Metaxas why that's not going to work and what the truth with a capital T just might be. Hello folks, hello friends, welcome back yet again. It's the Pro Channel where we continue to deliver you the news you need to know. If you're new to the channel, we want to say a huge thank you and welcome aboard. It's an attitude of gratitude every time you decide to click one of these videos. Folks, click the like button. Let's bring on Eric Metaxas, a genius, a historian, a writer, and a prolific thinker on all things America. So this channel and what we do here is we cover entertainment, we cover stories, and we believe that stories really matter. We think that stories actually are the embedded ethos that we role play out. And so I wanted to thank you, first of all, for having written this book for folks who can see it out there, Amazing Grace by Eric Metaxas. And it talks about William Wilberforce. And one of the things that I've been intrigued by has been the effort to capture the narrative surrounding America. And so I'm very thankful for this new book that you've written, Revolution. So there's two areas I'd like to go into within the sort of the confines of what we cover here in entertainment, which is essentially the story of America. It seems to me, Mr. Metaxas, that there's an effort to redefine the story of America in a lesser than way and to take away much of what has made this country and its adventure so worthwhile and so important. What are your thoughts on that? Go ahead.
I just want to say there's a term for that. And this is a technical term. Maybe your audience is not familiar with it. This is called lying. It's called lying. Because when you do the research, as I did, and you read, dozens, scores and scores of books, I mean, I can't even tell you, the story that comes out is undeniably beautiful and inspiring. This is one of the greatest stories in the history of the world, the birth of the greatest nation in the history of the world, a nation that says, our rights come from God, and no one can take those rights from you. No government, no one can take those rights from you. It's an idea that is so beautiful, and it comes into history 250 years ago, and it leads to freedom and flourishing. And, that you have to say, of course, America is not perfect because America is full of human beings and we've got flaws. But in terms of nations in the world, there has never been a nation like the United States of America. And even if you're aware of all of our flaws and our shortcomings, there's still never been a nation like America. It's absolutely amazing. And I think part of the story is that where do you get this idea of liberty? Where do these ideas come from? Well, I think, again, PBS and a lot of mainstream media, they're uncomfortable. The New York Times is uncomfortable. Why? Because these ideas come from the Bible. They don't like that, right? These ideas come from the Bible. The people of the revolution said, our rights come from God. No one can take our rights from us. We're made in God's image. So Thomas Jefferson famously in the Declaration says, we're created. Obviously, we're created by God. So the government doesn't give us our rights. Our rights are given to us by dint of the fact that we are human beings created in the image of God. And I think that you get a lot of people in elite culture, they're uncomfortable by this. And they don't like celebrating, celebrating America. I was saying it's like, if your kid has a 10th birthday and you say to your daughter, well, but we don't want to celebrate because there's a lot of flaws, and your friends and family, we're going to gather and we're going to tell you what you've been doing wrong on your birthday. Like, how sick is that? That's what it is not to celebrate America. It's a nation that we've overcome most of our shortcomings. It's kind of amazing. We ought to celebrate that. But the main thing for me is to know the story and the stories, to know the names: Nathan Hale, Henry Knox, George Washington, John Adams, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, Paul Revere. These are amazing heroes. And when you know their stories, you can't help but get happy. You can't help but be inspired. So I'm fascinated that a lot of people get that. And there's a lot of people that they just don't like it. So we're living in a weird time, where people they kind of feel like, well, I need to wring my hands and be uncomfortable and guilty. There's a time to celebrate. And, if our 250th anniversary is not a time to celebrate, I don't know when there is a time to celebrate.
Sure. And the effort has been redefine and malign. Now, in particular, I'd like to ask you, because You didn't name this the American Revolution. You named it
Right.
Revolution, the Birth of the
Right.
Greatest Nation. And in particular, I wonder if that's because the other revolutions were catastrophic. Only one revolution produced what we see. And you've been talking about some of these elements that generated this. What are your thoughts on how this came to be? How in the world did we get to a point where uniquely in the moment of history, this story begins, the story of America, with people essentially foregoing the power they could have had and gifting the power to the people? How did this come to be, and what sets it apart from other revolutions?
I mean, first of all, thank you for saying that, because I think that's an important point, that I titled the book Revolution, not the American Revolution, because I said there's only been one revolution that has succeeded. And we as Americans need to know that. The whole world needs to know that. There's only been one revolution. The French Revolution is a bitter joke. It's a tragedy. The French Revolution, they had all the language, égalité, fraternité, liberté. They have all these terms, but what happens in France, they don't succeed the way we succeeded. It turns into a bloodbath, a reign of terror. After they kill the king and the queen, they kill the priests and the nuns. They are anti-clerical, anti-church, anti-God. They thought that they could achieve something by kicking God out, not just the king, but kicking God out. Our revolution understood that, yeah, we're going to get rid of King George III, but we're going to put ourselves under God. God is our king. So they're going back to the Old Testament idea of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, coming out from under Pharaoh, and saying, okay, well, now we're going to be free and we're going to look directly to God. Now, if you're a secularist, that makes you uncomfortable, but that's the story of the American Revolution. Everybody involved, including the least religious figures, including Jefferson, Franklin, they all got the memo. This is what we're doing. We are going to get rid of an earthly king, but now we're going to put ourselves under the authority of God, our king. And of course, when you believe in liberty, it means we're not going to force people to go to church. We're not going to be a theocracy. No. We are free. So people can believe anything they want. You can be an atheist, you can be a Muslim, you do whatever you want to do. But the idea of liberty comes from the Bible. We're modeling it on this Old Testament idea of the Israelites coming out from Pharaoh and Egypt. That's the story of America. And so when I title the book Revolution, what I'm saying is the only time this has ever happened that a nation has pulled away from tyranny, from Pharaoh, and actually succeeded in modern times is America. The French Revolution, as I said, is a dramatic failure. I mean, they trade their king for what? For an emperor dictator. That's not a good trade. We actually managed to pull this off because we knew that the only way you can govern yourself is if you put the reason our coins say "In God We Trust" is because we understand that's the only way that it works. That we have to have this common understanding that we don't want to be a country where the government is going to tell us what to do and what not to do, but then we have to govern ourselves. How do you govern yourself? Well, all the founders, George Washington, John Adams, they wrote about this. They all understood it comes from having virtue and character, which mostly comes from faith. So we can't force faith, but that's how it works. And I think that the secular left in America, they get very uncomfortable. So they just kind of wriggle away from it as though there's another way to have liberty, but there's not. I mean, if you can figure that out, tell me what the other way is, but I don't see how you get there.
So talk with us about how organized the effort is to redefine the American story. Is this all synthetic, or is it organic, or who is out there trying to redefine what America has been and sort of assign it a negativity that perhaps we look at and we say, well, history is always messy because people are always messy. But these people who set the country on its course were extraordinary in ways that made this possible. Who's behind trying to change that story and teach our children a different path?
Well, it's a lot of people. I mean, again, there are a lot of people that are fundamentally uncomfortable with the idea of God. So they pretend that you can get America and liberty without God. And I say, show me how. And I'm not joking. Show me. Because to me, when you look at the French Revolution, or God forbid, the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Chinese Communist Revolution, they all promise the same thing. We're going to give the power to the people. We're going to take it away from the elites and give it to the people. What actually happens in every case is the murder of millions of people, the torture of millions of people, the Gulag Archipelago, just the opposite of what they promised. It's like a diabolical bait and switch every time. But there are people that they just don't care. They're just convinced, well, we'll try it again. We'll try it again. We got Mamdani in New York where I live. You've got all these people that they somehow seem to think that, no, it'll work this time, or at least they're claiming it'll work. And what they're banking on, and this is why I wrote the book, they're banking on enough Americans that are ignorant of our story and of how liberty works. If we get enough people that don't get this, we can fool them. We can sell them the lie again and again and again. Just as a lot of French were sold that lie in the French Revolution, just as a lot of Soviets and Russians were sold that lie in 1917, we're going to sell that lie, and then we got them. And so I think you just have a panoply, a spectrum of people that they believe this idea. I mean, we have people in the Senate today who do not know what the Declaration of Independence says, that our rights come from God. These are members of the Senate. So if you think things are bad, I mean, if you have that in the Senate, you know that there are tons of Americans that don't know our history. If you don't know our history, you are open, you're a sitting duck for deception, and that's what's happening. That's how you elect people that are promising the same thing that was promised by Vladimir Lenin in 1917. I mean, it's utopianist nonsense, and they're going to enslave you. And so these forces have always existed. I mean, the British were doing this, in the 1760s, but we had people in America who said, no, we're not buying it. You're wrong. You need to explain. How can you tax us? How can you if you don't explain that to our understanding, we're not paying the taxes. We're not your slaves. And that's something that, again, it's inspiring when you read these stories, when you learn these stories, you're inspired because they're not blowing smoke. They're saying this is the way it works. This is what we believe, and we will bow to no king. We govern ourselves. These are beautiful ideas in the history of the world that have led to tremendous wealth and flourishing around the world. And I think that, again, we have to get to where we're celebrating this and understanding this, because otherwise all the folks that would deceive us will succeed. And again, we know that a lot of them are succeeding in deceiving people because many Americans don't know this stuff.
So let's think through this together, and then I'll present an idea, and you tell me what you think about it. One of the proponents who's been arguing in the direction that you're talking about as a dangerous idea that has led to revolutions that collapse is Sam Harris, famous for being one of the four horsemen of the atheists, right? So he posits that you can form an axiomatic belief that human well-being is something that we can look at objectively in some way, some rubric, and that we can all agree, separating everything out from God, that if we strive towards making a better world for humans in terms of well-being, that we will usher in some sort of free will, non-existent, but deterministic utopia. And I share your skepticism in that, and I think that leads to these kinds of issues. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that at least one of, and maybe the key component, the axiomatic belief that brings forth America is the idea that every person is infinitely valuable, that they're endowed with at least, what would you say, the image of God, and that because all rights come from God, that this then allows a flourishing, like technological flourishing, market flourishing, and all of these sorts of things. And so I think that I think people are persuaded for some reason into believing that we're deterministic, that we don't have free will, even though that creates chaos. So I don't know how, and I don't know why you would get out of bed exactly every day if that's the case. Like, I just don't understand why you would. I have no idea what would be your motivation. But you say that the divine, the belief in the divine, and the belief that the divine is intrinsically linked to the human experience, that is a key component of what is America.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And I say to anybody, listen, if you don't believe in God, read my book, Is Atheism Dead? Because I think that that pretty much puts to bed the idea that there's no God. And I say this honestly. I think that science has pointed more and more clearly to the idea that where we live, it was all designed. I don't think that's debatable at this point. So if you say, well, I still got questions, that's fine, but educate yourself. The latest information, I would say, from science points in the direction of the existence of God so dramatically that you will be actually shocked. And that's my book, Is Atheism Dead? there are many other books, but that's the one that I obviously wrote. But I think that if you talk to the people of the Revolutionary Era, every one of them believed that the only way we can govern ourselves is if the people have virtue. I mean, they all wrote this. So you have to deal with that the freest nation in the history of the world came into being because people were willing to risk their lives for these ideas. And at the heart of it is the idea that we have a population that can govern themselves. These are virtuous people. If you have people who are lunatics, you cannot govern yourself. So you have to have virtuous people. You have to have enough people, and you have to have a culture of virtue. And all of the founders said this comes from faith. Now, it doesn't mean that you might just pick this up from the culture and you don't even know why you believe this is the right thing. But they understood, and Washington writes about this really clearly. I quote him at the end of my book, that this comes from religious faith. And so it's nice to say, well, I think it can come from other means, but you really, at some point, somebody with a bigger gun than you is going to say, shut up and do what I tell you. That's the history of the world. And you have to say, either I'm willing to die for what I believe in, or I'm going to resist you, or you're going to say, oh, okay, I guess I have no choice. You really need to understand what you believe. And why is it that everybody in the Revolutionary Era believed what we're talking about here? So, the idea that we can just say, well, okay, but now everybody's nicer. So people like Sam Harris act like, well, everybody's nicer now, and everybody in my neighborhood in Brooklyn is really cool, and they're not going to murder me. Well, that's really nice, but that doesn't work on a world level, because there are bad guys. There are thugs. There are villains. There are rapists and murderers. And this has always been the case in the world. But a lot of progressives try to act like, well, we've evolved past that. They were saying that, the progressives in the 1920s and 30s, that we've evolved past that. Well, then we get to Auschwitz. Then we get to the Holocaust. Tell the people going in boxcars to Treblinka and the death camps that humanity has evolved, that we're nicer now. What about Pol Pot, and the Khmer Rouge? I mean, there is evil in the world, and you need to deal with that. And I think a lot of these progressives, they don't want to deal with it. Basically, they're uncomfortable by the idea of God, or by the idea of these American ideas, and so they just kind of are willful and saying, well, we can do it this way. It has never worked. And again, on paper, I don't know how you can get it to where, like, show me how it's going to work. It doesn't. But I guess they're afraid maybe of theocracy. They're afraid that some Christians are gonna, it's like the Handmaid's Tale. And what I find funny is that the story of America is the opposite of that. I mean, the birth of America is the birth of the idea of religious liberty, that nobody can force you to believe. So at the heart of all of this stuff is liberty, and the idea that nobody has the right to force you to believe. Who wants to force you to believe what they believe? Islamofascists want to do that. If they can take over, they can get power, they will force you to be a second-class citizen or to convert, or they'll kill you. Who else wants to force you to believe? Atheists. Go to North Korea, go to communist China and say, like, I'm going to have a church in my house, and me and my friends, we're going to read the Bible. See how the communist Chinese deal with you. Let's say you're a Uyghur Muslim in China. See how they deal with you. The communist Chinese deal with you because you say you believe in God instead of the government. Authoritarian governments, they want to force you to buy into their ideology. The only ideology that does not force you into buying it is biblical faith, is the God of the Bible. That's the irony. And so if you think about it, that's what the founders discovered. They said, we got 13 colonies, all these different denominations, but we have Christian faith in common. And if we really squeeze hard, what pops out? Liberty. The idea that we are not going to establish a religion. We're not going to tell you need to go to the Congregationalist church on a Sunday morning. We're no longer the world of the Massachusetts Bay Colony of 1635. We're in a new place. So we have these Christian beliefs, but the central belief of the Christian faith is liberty. That's a wild idea in human history, and it leads to the greatest nation in the history of the world. Americans used to understand this. Most Americans understood all this stuff, and I think because we've drifted so far is why I wrote the book. I said, we need to know our story. We've drifted far, and we got a lot of people kind of gaslighting us about, hey, everything can be great, under this progressive social democracy or democratic socialism. It's like, well, Not really. And if you don't know your history, you're going to be open to those lies.
Right. 100 million deaths was not enough. Let's start with the 78 degrees on your thermostat and we'll go from there. What I love about what you just said is the aspect of free agency. So we're talking about the divine, but part of the idea of Christianity is the concept that you have to freely come into relationship into God. And I know there are doctrinal differences between different denominations, but the idea of free agency is amazing to me, because if that was a pillar of building America, what does free agency do then? Well, free agency, and we're not talking about the MLB or the NBA right now, folks, but free agency, you as a unique individual who gets to decide your path forward under, as they would have said at that point, under hopeful the watchful eye of providence with a capital P. If you have free agency, well, what does that gestate into being then? Well, the free market. And what does free agency then birth in with the free market? Well, science, which has been sort of this academic process, suddenly has a monetary reason to then produce great and wonderful things, which then brings upon us all of these great inventions that America bestows upon the world. So from this axiomatic belief in the divine, and it's worth pursuing the divine, and how could you evolve any higher than looking to the highest, best possible measure and then going for that with all your soul, right? That would be part of those most important commandments, the two of them. It seems to me that America, whether knowingly or unknowingly, was the birthplace of the modern technological world, and we take that for granted. We just totally dismiss that without recognizing what was the bedrock that created that.
Everything you said is beautiful and true. I mean, who put a man on the moon? Everywhere you look. I mean, Thomas Edison, he didn't grow up in Belgium. We are a nation that, and again, this is God's idea, right? Is that he creates us in his image. Human beings are amazing. All they need to do is be unshackled, to be free to do what they can do. And what happens? You just get extraordinary leaps forward, whether technologically or in every area. You see amazing things happen. That's the story of America. There is no country that begins to compete with the United States of America. I mean, it's just an astonishing thing. And it is not because we Americans are better. It is not. We're equal to anybody in the world. The difference is our system, and that people buy into the system, which is why, when we have immigration, if people don't buy into this, they can't become Americans. We're an idea. We're a nation. We're a new kind of nation in the history of the world, where we believe in these ideas, we believe in these freedoms. And if you don't believe in that stuff, if you want to have Sharia law, you can't live in America. If you want to say, well, I want to beat my wife and marry a 12-year-old, and it's none of your business. In America, you can't exist here. We have a kind of a fundamental series or set of beliefs. And if you don't buy into that, you can't be American. But if you do buy into that, anyone can be American. It's got nothing to do with the color of your skin or what country you come from. So these are beautiful ideas, and we get to live with those ideas. And it's why we need to celebrate them. We need to teach them to our kids. I'm doing a kid's version of this book because I said, we've got to get this out there. It really is. I mean, in my lifetime, so many people have drifted away from understanding this. When I was a little kid, most Americans understood this stuff, but we've drifted really far. And if you want to know why we're open to lunacy, it's just because a lot of folks don't know our history, and it's a beautiful history. And I think we owe it to the men who suffered and died in the revolution to know their stories.
Could you share with the audience who may not be familiar? Who are you? What do you do? And what are you up to these days?
Who am I? That's like an existential question. That's heavy, but I'll keep it simple.
All right, Marty McFly.
I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I grew up in New York City and in Connecticut, and I am a writer. Mainly, I'm known. I guess I'm known as the host of my podcast, the Metaxas show. I do a thing called Socrates in the City. But a lot of people know me mainly as a writer. I've written a lot of books. I wrote a book called Bonhoeffer, which was a huge bestseller a few years ago about a pastor who got involved in the plot to kill Hitler. It was turned into a movie called Bonhoeffer. I've just written a lot of books, but the new book is called I was just going to say, Is Atheism Dead? That's not right. That's the last book. I've read a lot of books. The new one is about the American Revolution.
Revolution, sir.
And it is, I mean, I wrote it because I say this is our super centennial. This is our 250th, the super centennial of the country. And I just thought I need to write a book that tells the whole story of how the country came into being, what happened 250 years ago. And it turns out to be a very exciting story. Every American should be inspired by our story. And I wrote it because I think a lot of us have drifted away from knowing this. Like, we've been living in a time the last 40, 50 years where America's been denigrated. A lot of people have just kind of drifted away from celebrating who we are. And I thought that's kind of sick, actually, because when you know who we are and how we came into being and how people suffered and died so that we could have liberty and self-government, it's a pretty horrible thing if we don't understand what that is. And so I said, I want to write a kind of a fun book that tells the story. And as you mentioned, it's been selling so well. I'm amazed.
Despite their best efforts to stop you, you're still succeeding.
Well, it's kind of funny, though, isn't it? It's like, I think that, I'll tell you, when the book first came out, so this is like 5 weeks ago, it was number 2 on the New York Times list. And it was last night it came out, it was number 2 again, right? When it came out as number 2, the number 1 book, according to the New York Times, was the Jill Biden book. Now, I don't know anybody who really wants to read the Jill Biden book, but we looked into it, and the official publishing numbers were that her book sold 25% less copies, fewer copies than my book. So the New York Times is always kind of pushing, it's not a true list, right? It's like, it's kind of what they want it to be. But even so, they had to put my book at number 2. Last night, they put it at number 2. What's the number 1 book? Oh, it happens to be a book by 2 New York Times reporters. So yes, the mainstream media, or in this case, the leftist lunatic media, I mean, because the New York Times doesn't get worse than the New York Times, they don't like the true story of America. They'd rather have the kind of the sad story that you can watch on Ken Burns's PBS version, which is kind of depressing, to be honest. I mean, it's not kind of depressing. It is depressing. It's not exciting. And it's kind of like the radical left. It's like if they're doing a remake of the Rocky movie, they would make you walk out of the theater like, I don't know who really was the hero. Like, they both had their stories, That's not a good movie. And so when they tell the story of America, it's exactly the same thing. They don't really feel like they should celebrate America. They want to tell you about what's wrong with America. There's something sick about that. It would be like if it's your daughter's 10th birthday and you're like, well, you know what? We don't want to celebrate too much. All your friends and family, we're going to focus on where you can do better on your birthday. Like, it's pretty sick. And that's kind of where we are in America. So I wrote my book as a celebration, but again, I shouldn't say I wrote it as a celebration. It is a celebration, but I didn't write it that way. I just said I want to tell the story, or the stories, of what happened, 250 years ago. Turns out it is something to celebrate. Turns out these are amazing heroes. We need to know their names and their stories. You can't help but get inspired when you know it. And so I said, I've got to tell these stories for a new generation in a way that I hope is fun. And a lot of people have been saying that, I can't put it down. It reads like a novel. As an author, that's the greatest thing you want to hear, because a dull history book is a bad history book. So I am really excited that many Americans are familiarizing themselves with, our great story, which is, this is the time. This is the summer.
When you stick around for the entire video, it really does help the channel. And we're so appreciative of that, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine that you would stick around and hear everything we have to say. The studio is glistening because you're listening each and every day. If you're not yet subscribed, well, you should be. And click that like button. Until the next time, keep learning, keep growing, and as always, keep having fun.